toxic, relativistic, deconstructive, anarchists. Every good guru must have a worthy adversary, and for Peterson, that enemy is postmodern neo-Marxism, a term he uses to encapsulate his critique of the unified destructive forces he believes are undermining Western society. To Peterson, postmodern neo-Marxism captures the essence of postmodern thought, positioning it not as a philosophical or literary theory, but as a pervasive, destructive movement, devoid of rationality and ultimately a threat to society. But who are the postmodernists? Or more fundamentally, what is postmodernism? At the heart of postmodernism lies a skepticism towards meta-narratives. A meta-narrative is a comprehensive, all-encompassing worldview or ideology that seeks to explain the meaning of history, society, or human existence. Meta-narratives are the big stories we tell ourselves about capitalism, Christianity, or the importance of the family unit. Postmodern thinkers argue that these grand narratives are inherently reductive, exclusionary, and oppressive. They fail to account for marginalized voices and can be used to justify cruel and disciplinary treatment of others. The postmodernist project, then, is above all a deconstruction of these narratives and attempts to reveal their underlying power dynamics and privileging of certain voices over others. If there is one consistent enemy in postmodern thought, it is the notion of a universal truth. The postmodernist favors the peculiar and pluralistic. Notably, both Jordan Peterson and postmodernist thinkers share a deep skepticism towards ideologies, especially those that claim universal truths. Peterson argues, ideologies are substitutes for true knowledge. They offer easy answers to difficult questions, and they promise security, order, and peace. But they do so at the cost of truth, complexity, and the individual. People who are possessed by ideologies are blinded by their certainty. They become fanatical, incapable of adapting to new information or responding to complex situations. Postmodernism, broadly, is a deconstruction of these dominant narratives, revealing their biases and how they marginalize certain voices. Importantly, Peterson argues that postmodernism is a far more radical critique of ideology, in that it endorses relativism and nihilism. Derrida, a formidable opponent in Peterson's mind, had publicly denied any advocacy for radical relativism, nor did he support any notion that his deconstructivism was hostile towards truth or science. Derrida never even labeled his own philosophy postmodernism. And Foucault, while critical of power, has also argued that yes, power is unavoidable, but we should educate ourselves in understanding its more subtle mechanisms. Foucault had even written an extensive ethics of anti-fascism, something that Peterson would likewise be quite interested in. In contrast to Peterson's critique, the focus is not on moral nihilism or anarchy, but on uncovering structures that sustain the status quo. Perhaps one of the greatest stories we tell ourselves is the notion of selfhood. What? You're telling me that postmodernists don't believe I exist? Yes. Postmodernism challenges the notion of a unified, stable self, emphasizing the fragmented and fluid nature of identity. Their critique of subjectivity is actually quite similar to the Buddhist conception of the self or ego as illusory. Drawing from fields such as psychoanalysis, post-structuralism, and feminism, postmodern theorists argue that identity is a narrative we tell ourselves, constructed through a multiplicity of discourses, power relations, and social contexts that are based on larger meta-narratives. Most postmodernists would argue that the self is not a fixed entity, but a constantly shifting assemblage of roles, desires, and contradictions. This recognition of the plurality of identities is a critique of traditional categories of race, gender, and sexuality that propose some sort of essential self or human nature. Instead, postmodernism invites individuals to embrace the complexity and fluidity of their own experiences. The postmodern project, influenced by Derrida's concept of deconstruction, suggests that meaning is not fixed. Instead, it is shaped by context, language, and power relations. Derrida famously said, "There is nothing outside of the text," indicating that all meaning is contingent, ever-changing, and shaped by power dynamics. In contrast, postmodernism seeks to radically deconstruct these narratives, seeing them as tools of oppression and control. Philosophical thinking requires critical thinking, especially when practicing deconstructivism. In a world overwhelmed by information, the ability to stay open to learning and see the bigger picture clearly is an invaluable but often underdeveloped skill. I've always valued challenging my biases in order to grow. That's why I'm grateful to today's sponsor, Skillshare, which has been an excellent resource for refining these skills. What sets Skillshare apart is its learning paths, curated sequential collections of classes designed to help you master a specific skill. Through these learning paths, I've been able to dive deeper into areas like critical thinking, creativity, and personal development. Classes like How to Think Differently, Creative Writing for All, and Writing for Self-Discovery have allowed me to explore new perspectives, sharpen my problem-solving abilities, and unlock my creative potential in a structured, supportive way. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, offering thousands of classes led by industry experts in areas such as design, film, and productivity. Whether you're looking to advance your career, explore a new passion, or improve your personal skills, Skillshare has something for you. With its learn-by-doing approach, you can create and share projects, receiving valuable feedback from the community to continue growing. The first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. Peterson similarly endorses this view of the self as a process rather than fixed entity. The will to power is the fundamental impulse to expand your capacity to understand and master the world, and to use your power to shape it. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is central to both his philosophy and Peterson's thinking. For Nietzsche, the pursuit of truth is intertwined with power, the desire to assert one's own meaning in a world that lacks inherent purpose. Peterson often interprets this idea to emphasize that individuals are driven to impose meaning on the world. However, Peterson's focus on individual empowerment contrasts with postmodernism's deeper focus on how power operates within social structures. He relies on a pragmatist theory of truth to guide the individual, arguing that an interpretation is valid if acting on it guides one towards the desired outcome. He sees individuals navigating the chaotic world and imposing their own structure, though he doesn't take it as far as Derrida's radical interpretation, often endorsing biological hierarchy and Judeo-Christian tradition as potential paths forward. Peterson, a psychologist, heavily relies on specific ways of looking at the world, like biology and religion, as being the main interpretational device to guide us. There are endless studies that demonstrate just how flawed and easily manipulated our biologically evolved reasoning mechanisms can be. While Jordan Peterson critiques the left's focus on empathy and collective action, he overlooks that postmodernism's focus on empathy, particularly Derrida's concept of unconditional hospitality, is not just about naive openness, but about understanding the paradox of justice. Derrida's idea, much like Peterson's passion for free speech, suggests that true justice and democracy require creating space for others, even those who might be seen as enemies. It's not about blindly accepting all perspectives, but about allowing for dialogue and the possibility of change through understanding. As Peterson himself argues, the purpose of the free speech issue is to allow you to express your thoughts without fear of being punished, so that you can think freely. And when you can think freely, you can do the real work of solving problems. If you cannot speak, then you are enslaved. This actually aligns with Derrida's notion of unconditional hospitality, which emphasizes inclusivity and open dialogue, even when it might be uncomfortable or risky. Both Peterson and Derrida advocate for a space where voices, regardless of their perspectives, can be heard. However, such ideas also carry inherent dangers. If taken to extremes, unconditional openness or unfiltered speech could lead to chaos or harm. The balance lies in allowing others to express their truths without excluding anyone from the conversation, all while maintaining the integrity of the system in which these exchanges occur. Does Peterson demonstrate such openness to others? He frequently employs the term postmodern neo-Marxist as a catch-all label to disparage a wide array of groups, from Marxists and postmodernists to liberal politicians and feminists. In doing so, he wields this umbrella term almost like a weapon, using it to frame a broad, generalized critique that he never has to actually engage in. His approach often comes across as condescending, positioning himself as a lone voice of reason in opposition to a perceived cultural threat. But the term itself fails to account for the majority opinion held by academics. In one survey, with over 1,972 academics, some 3% lean towards skepticism, while only 1.8% unconditionally accepted it. No less than 81.6% accepted or leaned towards non-skeptical realism, 75% accepted scientific realism, and only 3.3% accepted scientific anti-realism. Ironically, Peterson, a supposed advocate of such scientific realism, appears to be far more radical when he goes against the scientific consensus of climate change existing, or confidently applies Gödel's infinity theorem to moral and cultural systems. Perhaps one day Peterson can learn these values of unconditional hospitality, just as Derrida suggests. If Peterson were to embrace this mindset, perhaps he and the postmodern neo-Marxists could even set aside their ideological differences and embark on a journey towards mutual understanding, one where the focus shifts from conflict to the pursuit of deeper, more meaningful dialogue, grounded in empathy and the recognition of each other's complexity.